Good evening. I'm Charles Payne. President-elect Donald Trump basking in a glow of yet another win for the American automaker and workers on the heel of an announcement that this time it's from Fiat Chrysler of a $1 billion investment in 2 U.S. plants. Trump tweeting, "It's finally happening. Fiat Chrysler just announced plans to invest $1 billion in Michigan and Ohio plants, adding 2,000 jobs. This after Ford said last week that it will expand in Michigan and U.S. instead of building a $1 billion plant in Mexico. Thank you, Ford and Fiat C." Joining me now to discuss Shelby, Holliday, Brian Brenberg, and Kevin Paul Scott. Kevin, these victories keep coming. Is there anything to be concerned about? Because it feels like the new Twitter/bully pulpit is working for the American worker.
Charles, I think it's great. I think the bully pulpit is exactly what he needs to be doing. And a lot of people right now want to talk about free trade versus tariffs and what's going to happen. I think as long as Donald Trump continues to use the bully pulpit, you're going to keep seeing automakers. They're going to respond to this. And it's not just going to be that industry. Other industries will follow suit. And you know who wins? The American people. So this is great. I think it needs to keep happening.
What industry do you think would be next, Kevin?
Well, I think you're going to see it in a lot of industries. I think specifically maybe the manufacturing, anything that's manufacturing, coming back to America, people stopping to move plants. And I really think Donald Trump is going to go after Silicon Valley. He's going to go after the tech industry that is exporting so many jobs overseas. When he is able to start influencing them, they're going to look across and say, all right, if he's serious with the automakers, he'll be serious with us. I think it's going to have long-term ramifications that are going to help American workers.
All right, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, this is good news, but look, let's just throw a few facts out there. We're talking, first of all, about SUVs and trucks. Nobody's bringing cars back to the U.S., and it makes sense to make SUVs and trucks here. This is where the demand is. This is where you can do it at a profit margin. These are decisions that were made, 3, 4, even in some cases a decade in the past, right? These are not decisions that were made in the last month. So the automakers here are responding to the economics, I think,
although
more than
with
the
Ford,
politics.
throughout the election process and in primary, the CEO of Ford kept saying, we're going to build this Mexico plant. I mean, Mark Field said this over and over again. So they had some sort of epiphany within that Ford boardroom within the last few
but
weeks.
Notice they're not bringing any small car production back to the U.S. They're going to expand trucks here in the U.S. They're going to expand electric cars in the U.S., but they're not bringing the small car production back because it doesn't make economic sense for them to do so. Economics is still driving this much more than politics.
I want the audience to listen to what the CEO of Toyota Motors had to say, because at some point, Donald Trump, he may have to actually use this big stick that he keeps talking about.
It's not good for the industry. There are some industries that benefit. The automotive industry definitely does not. It's going to raise prices, which likely will shrink the industry. It will lower demand, and it will cost jobs.
Shelby is referring to this border tax, also known as the Border Adjustment Tax, BAT. A lot of industries, including retail, say this would be a tough one, but there's very few options that Donald Trump would have to level the playing field, if you will.
Well, we have a lot of uncertainty surrounding that tax because Trump's plan is a little different from House Republicans' plans. At this point, we're not sure whose will win out. But Trump has mentioned a 35% tax at the border. For some reason, as we pointed out earlier, he's going after autos. We're not sure what industry he'll go after next. But it's not just cars coming in, it's parts. Auto parts is a huge factor here. Wilbur Ross was on a panel with Mornings with Maria, and he pointed out the problem with TPP and some of these free trade agreements is that you have parts going into Mexico, coming back in cars. They're never really taxed as imports when they really are, in fact, imports. So we have a lot to be seen with regards to NAFTA.
But how does Donald Trump, if one of these companies, because General Motors, they're all saying, hey, we're not going to do small vehicles. Push comes to shove, Donald Trump says, hey, I've got to show these people that I mean business. And maybe not 35% tax, but how does he show these industries and other industries that are watching that he means business?
Well, it's interesting because right now there's so much uncertainty. I was just reading some research notes from analysts. There's so much uncertainty surrounding his plans that it's actually deferring investment in Mexico and encouraging investment in the U.S. Automakers know what policies we're going to see here in the U.S. in terms of taxes, in terms of trade. They don't know what they're going to see in Mexico. So it is working in that sense, but can that work long term? That's a tough question. That remains to be seen.
I mean, uncertainty is such a bad business policy. And by the way, why in the world is it that we have to have small car production back in the U.S.? Why does he have to bring the hammer down on that? There are a lot of other margins.
But because of the jobs that come along with it, no?
Oh, but come on now. You know that if they bring small car production back to the U.S., those are going to be highly automated plants. Everybody forgets about the technological automation case here, but you can't forget about that when you're talking about manufacturing. That's the trend of manufacturing in the U.S.
Well, and at this point, I think it's interesting to note that at this point, automakers see that the benefit of these fewer regulations will outweigh any sort of border tax. The question is, long term, what will interest rates do? What will automation do? What will this ride-sharing economy do?
Well,
those are big questions.
Besides those questions, though, Kevin, is that before NAFTA went into effect, we had a trade surplus with Mexico. The year it went into effect, we had a $1.6 billion surplus. 2 years before that, almost $6 billion. It's been reversed, and now we have a $60 billion deficit. People point to that and say, between a $60 billion deficit and a surplus, there has to be a solution in there that helps the American worker.
Yeah, there's no question. There has to be some equity that's brought to the table. Right now, most of the agreements are built and stacked against the U.S. I think Donald Trump, and I'm not saying he's not willing to back up what he says, but right now he doesn't need to, because what he's saying is enough to move the needle. He's making change through his words. I think if he doesn't get the change he wants, he'll make some actions, and I don't think you're going to see some crazy regressive tax structures. I think what you're going to see is him leveling the playing field, and that's exactly what needs to happen.
Brian? Shaking your head.
Well, the idea of moving the needle here, I mean, the needle is moved ever so slightly. To really get the needle to move, it's not job-owning automakers. It's getting tax reform passed and regulatory reform passed. If those things don't happen, none of this matters.
What if those things do happen?
I think those workers, those 2,000 workers, they think it's moving the needle for them.
Well, what's moving the needle are his policies that the automakers themselves say this is why we're investing in the U.S. It's not because Trump threatened us at the border. It's because we'll see lower taxes and fewer regulations.
Yeah, and what they're saying is we've made these decisions years in the past. It makes sense to make these kind of vehicles in the U.S. And yes, they love the regulatory, they love the tax stuff.
Right.
Let's make sure that gets through. We're watching this week Obamacare, repealing Obamacare and replacing it is very difficult. It's going to be the same thing with regulatory and tax. Don't waste your time on the wrong stuff. Go after the big things that matter.
All right, guys, thank you all very much.